Hey everybody, and welcome back to Sip and Talk. Wow, this one feels like trying to untangle a bowl of spaghetti while riding a unicycle. Seriously.
That's a good way to put it.
We're diving deep into the whole U.S. and China situation, how it's got the tech world buzzing,
Yeah.
And we'll be zooming in on what's going on with folks like Musk and Zuckerberg, specifically their views on China.
Yeah, and those alleged connections. It gets complicated fast.
Totally. We've pulled together a ton of stuff, news reports, some deeper analysis, even a YouTube video transcript that's, well, we'll definitely get to that one. Our mission today, pretty simple, really. Cut through the noise, give you the essential stuff, what's really happening, and why should you care, whether you're just scrolling on your phone or, checking your investments.
Exactly. It feels like this relationship is constantly shifting, and the tech giants are right there, kind of on the front lines.
Right.
We're seeing trade tensions continuing, geopolitical stuff getting more complex by the day, it seems, and these companies are just trying to navigate it all.
So, yeah, we want to give you a clear picture without making your brain melt. Let's try, anyway.
Let's do it. Where should we start?
Okay, let's start with something that might have given the folks at Apple maybe a little sigh of relief. Those tariff exemptions from way back in 2025, Trump rolled out some temporary brakes on smartphones and computers. What was the story there?
Right. That was interesting. What's fascinating here is what it tells us maybe about the strategy. So back in April of 2025, the administration decided to exempt smartphones, computers, and some other electronics from those tariffs that slapped on Chinese goods.
Okay.
Now, this was a big deal because, as the reports showed, it covered a huge chunk of stuff the U.S. imports from China. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars.
Hundreds of billions, wow.
Yeah, and over 100 billion of that was just smartphones alone. Think about how many iPhones that is.
Right, so if you were waiting to upgrade your phone, this was potentially good news for your wallet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Less chance of Apple, jacking up the prices.
Exactly. For a company like Apple, who, let's face it, still makes most of their iPhones in China, this was likely a very welcome break. Analysts at the time even called it a dream scenario for tech investors. It took some immediate pressure off their profits, definitely, and probably kept prices a bit lower for everyone buying their gadgets.
Okay.
But the key word there was temporary. The temporary nature of these exemptions hinted that, this wasn't a total reversal. It suggested the U.S. wasn't necessarily backing down on its broader trade stance.
Just tweaking it.
Yeah, maybe strategically calibrating to minimize the immediate hit on, domestic consumers.
But I remember it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still other tariffs in place, weren't there?
That's a really important point, yeah. These exemptions were specifically called temporary, and other tariffs absolutely stuck around, like the ones on fentanyl-related goods, for example. Plus, there was still talk, remember, about hitting semiconductors with tariffs down the road, which would have had just massive ripple effects across the entire tech industry, from your gaming console to your car. Everything, really.
Now, I saw some people saying back then that these exemptions were like Trump giving China a win or a concession. What's your take on that?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that sounds more like spin, maybe coming from China itself. The reality was, while these specific electronics got a temporary break, literally tons of other Chinese goods were still facing those high tariffs.
Right.
So it wasn't a case of the U.S. suddenly changing its entire approach. It felt more like a targeted move. And it's also worth considering that Taiwan, which is, a major hub for making electronics.
Huge.
Yeah, huge. They probably breathed a sigh of relief with these exemptions, too, given how much they contribute to that global supply chain.
Okay. So tariffs are one piece of this giant, complicated puzzle. Let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of the big names in tech and how they see China. First up, Elon Musk. Just sounds like all in China, right? What's his general vibe when it comes to Beijing?
Yeah, Musk's perspective seems heavily influenced by Tesla's massive business interests there. I mean, their Shanghai factory is their biggest worldwide.
Biggest globally, yeah.
And China is just a huge market for their cars. So because of that, he's generally been pretty supportive, publicly at least, of working with China.
Supportive how?
Well, he's publicly praised the Chinese people. He even suggested they should be involved in making the rules for artificial intelligence globally. And he had that pretty direct quote that made waves, remember? I'm kind of pro-China.
Yeah, that definitely made headlines. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows for him.
Yeah.
I feel like he's had a few things to say that weren't exactly praising them.
That's right. Yeah, while he's mostly positive, he has occasionally pointed out what he sees as unfairness. particularly in social media access.
Like the TikTok thing.
Exactly. He's mentioned that TikTok is huge in the U.S., but his platform, X, is banned in China. He sees that as a double standard.
Makes sense.
But despite those comments, Tesla keeps doubling down on China, like with that new battery factory they were building or are building in Shanghai.
Right, the investment continues. And then there was that whole Taiwan comment that stirred up quite the hornet's nest, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. That was much more controversial. He floated the idea of a Hong Kong model for Taiwan.
Yikes.
Yeah. It did not go down well with many people and drew pretty sharp criticism from officials in Taiwan. It really just highlighted the tricky tightrope these huge global business leaders walk when their company's success is so tied to places with, really sensitive political situations.
Totally. Okay, now let's talk about Mark Zuckerberg. His relationship with China feels like it's gone through more twists and turns than a mountain road.
That's a perfect way to put it. The Zuckerberg stance has definitely evolved, dramatically. Right. Early on, there was a very clear, very public push to get Facebook into China. Remember, he famously learned Mandarin.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
He even complimented Xi Jinping's book publicly. And then there was this rumored thing, Project Aldrin, this supposedly censored version of Facebook that Meta was reportedly considering just to try and please the Chinese government.
Wow. A censored Facebook just for China? Yeah. That sounds like a huge compromise of everything Facebook was supposed to stand for, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The reports suggested this would have involved giving the Chinese government quite a bit of control over what people could see and say. But ultimately, those efforts to break into China didn't succeed. Facebook is still not officially there. And more recently, Zuckerberg has taken a much more critical stance, especially regarding the potential ban on TikTok in the U.S., framing that as a national security concern.
Right, quite the shift. But then you hear these rumblings, these allegations about Zuckerberg and Meta potentially having some, unsettling connections with the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. What's the deal with that?
Okay, this is where things get really interesting and also where we need to be super careful with the information, distinguishing allegations from proven facts.
Got it.
There have been some serious claims made. Back in 2025, a former top policy person at Meta, Sarah Wynne Williams, filed a whistleblower complaint.
Okay.
She alleged that way back, maybe around 2015, Meta was actually thinking about sharing user data with China as a way to finally get into that market.
Sharing user data? Wow.
Yeah, and that they even developed tools specifically to censor content for that market. Now, the reports also say these plans were eventually scrapped, mainly because they didn't get the green light to operate in China anyway.
Okay, so they thought about it, developed some stuff, but didn't actually go through with sharing data then.
That's the key point for that specific period, based on those reports. They considered it, maybe built tools, but the data sharing part reportedly didn't happen because the market entry failed.
Okay. What else?
Then separately, in 2018, Meta did an internal investigation. And that found that a lot of developers, including some from countries considered high risk, like China and Russia, had accessed user data.
Oh.
But this was apparently due to some older policy loopholes from the earlier days of Facebook platform. Meta has said this wasn't like a proactive leak to those governments, but more a consequence of earlier, looser policies, and that they tightened up their security measures significantly afterwards.
Right, so that sounds more like a security lapse that they claim they fixed rather than deliberate sharing.
That's how Meta framed it, yes. But the allegations didn't stop there.
Okay.
No. Sarah Wynne Williams, the whistleblower, she testified in front of a Senate committee in 2025. And there, she claimed there was close cooperation between Meta and the CCP, specifically in developing these censorship tools and considering sharing data.
Close cooperation.
That was her phrase. However, it's important to note, the news reports on that testimony indicate that she didn't provide hard evidence of actual user data being handed over to the CCP. Consideration, tool development, yes. Actual transfer, unproven by her testimony, according to reports.
Gotcha. And then we have this YouTube video transcript we looked at, which paints a pretty dramatic picture.
It really does. The video, which has a pretty attention-grabbing title, makes some very strong assertions. It claims that Meta did work closely with the CCP, develop specific censorship tools.
Like what?
It even mentioned things like virality counters specifically for Hong Kong and Taiwan, presumably to suppress content. And it claimed that American users' data, including private stuff, was accessible in China, potentially putting people in Hong Kong and Taiwan who were critical of the government at serious risk.
Okay, that sounds incredibly serious. Did the video back up these claims with any proof? Like hard evidence?
This is really, really important. Right at the beginning of the video, it explicitly states, and I mean very clearly, that all of its content is presented as fiction and is purely hypothetical.
Okay. Fiction. Hypothetical. That's a massive disclaimer.
Huge. It tells viewers very clearly not to take anything in the video as fact.
Okay, so knowing that, what specific fictional scenarios did this video lay out? Just so we understand what kind of hypothetical it was exploring.
Right. So the fictional story in the video includes claims like Meta helped China outcompete other American businesses, particularly in AI. It suggested a link between Meta's open source AI model, Llama, and China's DeepSeek model.
Implying.
The implication, even though it's fictional, is that maybe open sourcing powerful AI could inadvertently benefit competing nations in sensitive areas. The video also describes, again fictionally, a chief editor role within Meta, supposedly with the power to censor content in specific regions like Xinjiang or around sensitive anniversaries like Tiananmen Square. And it alleges the existence of tools to target users based on their behavior and beliefs, which could theoretically be used for political propaganda. Those virality counters were part of this fictional toolkit, perhaps imagined as ways to detect and suppress the rapid spread of certain information online in specific sensitive regions.
So the video is essentially exploring a hypothetical worst-case scenario of what could happen if a company got too close, even though it explicitly says it's fiction.
Exactly. It's playing out potential dangers and implications of cooperation and data access, but it's crucial to remember it's framed as what if, not what is.
Right.
Now, bringing it back to the factual reporting again, as of April 14th, 2025, the evidence we have from news sources and Meta's statements does not directly prove that Meta actually leaked or handed over user data to the CCP.
Okay, so no smoking gun found in terms of actual data transfer based on the available reports. But the fact that these considerations about data sharing and the development of specific censorship tools were reportedly on the table at various points, I mean, that still raises some serious ethical questions for a company that claims to value connection and free expression, doesn't it?
Absolutely. This really highlights the major ethical tightrope that Meta and, frankly, other tech companies, too, walk when they try to balance their business ambitions in a huge, lucrative market like China with their stated commitments to user privacy and, democratic values.
Yeah.
The conflict between those priorities is pretty stark. It's a fundamental tension.
This all just brings us back to the broader issue, then, of China's influence on these giant U.S. tech companies. It sounds like it's not just about the personal views of CEOs like Musk or Zuckerberg, but this huge, tangled web of dependencies and pressures.
Precisely. China's influence is widespread across almost all the big U.S. tech players, Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, Google, Amazon, Meta, Tesla, NVIDIA. The list goes on. It touches so many different parts of their businesses.
Like what specifically? Where do we see China's influence the most?
Well, the most obvious areas are in making things manufacturing and the supply chain. Apple's massive iPhone production relies heavily on factories in China.
Still, even with diversification talks.
Still very heavily, yeah. Tesla's Shanghai plant, as we said, is critical for how they build cars globally. Even companies like NVIDIA, who design their amazing chips in the U.S., have a lot of their back-end manufacturing and supply chain tied to China and the region.
Okay, manufacturing. What else?
And then there's the temptation and the restrictions of the Chinese market itself.
Right. The billion-plus potential customers.
Exactly. It's a massive market, tons of potential customers, and U.S. companies are naturally eager to get a piece of that pie. We've seen Apple and Tesla have significant success there, selling a lot of products.
But it's not easy, right?
No, not at all. They also face a lot of rules and limitations, things like needing to censor content, agreeing to data localization laws.
What's data localization again?
That means regulations in China that require data generated within China to be stored on servers located within China. It creates big operational complexities for international tech companies and raises concerns about government access. These kinds of rules definitely shape how these companies operate, not just in China, but globally sometimes.
We can't forget about the competition from Chinese tech companies that are getting bigger and bigger.
Oh, that's a crucial point. Absolutely. Companies like Huawei, Tencent, Alibaba, they are huge global players now in areas like cloud computing, online shopping, gaming, and especially AI.
Right.
They are serious competitors for U.S. companies, both within China, obviously, but increasingly around the world, too. We even saw how those U.S. export restrictions on advanced semiconductors directly affected NVIDIA's ability to sell some of their highest-end AI chips in China.
Yeah.
And even though Meta hasn't broken into the Chinese market, their past attempts, like Project Aldrin, showed just how much they wanted to be there, how valuable they saw that market.
So it's this incredibly complicated dance of opportunity being kind of tied together through supply chains, but also facing restrictions and growing competition and different rules.
Wow.
It really is. Now, if we zoom out a bit from just the tech companies, how do all these tech tensions fit into the bigger picture of the relationship between the U.S. and China generally?
Well, looking at the broader geopolitical landscape, those U.S. tariff exemptions we talked about earlier, maybe they weren't the U.S. backing down like we discussed. Some analysts actually think China is getting worried about potentially being left out of new global trade deals.
Oh, interesting. Why?
There's a concern, perhaps, that other countries might forge new agreements with the U.S., leaving China kind of isolated and still facing those high tariffs.
It feels like we keep hearing talk about heading towards some kind of tech Cold War, maybe. Is that overstating it?
You know, the way things are being talked about, the rhetoric and the actions being taken, it definitely suggests a move in that direction. Concerns about China's trade practices, alleged intellectual property theft, unfair competition, those have definitely fueled this idea.
Right.
And we are seeing more and more countries looking to form new trade partnerships, often centered around the U.S., or shared security concerns, which could further isolate China economically if that trend continues.
And China's not just sitting back and watching this happen, are they?
Yeah.
I've heard they're trying to build influence in other parts of the world.
Correct. China is actively trying to build and strengthen relationships with countries in Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, other regions, likely to counter this potential isolation.
How are they doing that?
Using a mix of economic incentives like infrastructure investment through the Belt and Road Initiative, though that's also faced criticism and diplomatic efforts. However, it's not clear how successful they'll ultimately be, as many countries are probably trying to carefully balance their relationships with both the U.S. and China based on what's best for them. It's not always an either choice for those nations.
Right. There have even been some pretty direct warnings being issued lately, too, like the UK sending a high-level defense official to China. What was that about?
Yes, that was a significant move. The UK sent a senior defense official to Beijing specifically to clearly state their concerns about any possible military action by China in the Taiwan Strait. They emphasized how important peace and stability are in that region, not just for the region, but globally.
Wow, that's pretty direct.
Very direct signaling, yes.
And even the conflict in Ukraine has a connection, or an alleged connection, to China now, with those claims about Chinese citizens fighting for Russia.
That just adds another layer to the complexity, doesn't it? Ukraine has accused Chinese citizens of fighting alongside Russian forces. China has strongly denied these accusations. But regardless of the ultimate truth there, it highlights just how much scrutiny China's actions and its alliances, particularly its relationship with Russia, are under globally right now.
So it really sounds like the world is becoming more and more aware of the various challenges China is facing, both internally perhaps and definitely externally, and is starting to take more comprehensive, maybe more coordinated steps in response.
Exactly. I think that's a fair assessment. From trade policy and technology restrictions to diplomatic messaging and even military strategy and posture, there's a growing global awareness and, it seems, a more proactive approach to managing the complexities of the relationship with China.
Okay, so to try and wrap this sprawling thing up, it's clear that the U.S.-China relationship is this massive, incredibly complicated thing that's throwing curveballs at everyone, especially these big U.S. tech companies.
Yeah.
They're dealing with everything from tariffs and market access nightmares to these really thorny geopolitical issues. And those allegations around Meta and their potential past cooperation with the CCP.
Yeah.
Wow, that really shines a light on the incredibly difficult ethical decisions these companies have to make, or at least consider making.
Absolutely. And that's why this matters. Whether you're someone who uses these technologies every single day, or you're an investor trying to figure out the market, or maybe you're just someone trying to understand the big forces shaping our world, this whole dynamic is a story you really need to pay attention to.
Yeah. And it really makes you think, doesn't it? With everything so interconnected and these tensions always bubbling just under the surface or sometimes right on top, How do we as individuals, and maybe as societies, even begin to deal with the complexities of keeping our data private, ensuring national security, and navigating global business when we're dealing with countries that have such different values and political systems? And maybe even more fundamentally, what responsibility do these giant tech companies actually have in all of this?
Right, there's a lot to process.
It certainly is. A lot to think about.
Well, that's our deep dive for today. Hope it gave you maybe a bit more clarity on this tangled, messy, important situation. And hey, if you enjoyed this and want more thought-provoking stuff, maybe with a bit of fun mixed in, you know what to do. Go check out our good friend Micky's YouTube channel, Mickyytolife. That's M-I-C-K-Y to life. He's always got something interesting and entertaining dropping over there. Seriously, you won't be disappointed. Go subscribe.